Hey, what's up guys, it's Jamie. I'm going to be showing you how the mat form field works today. Um, so that'll include like basic error messages as well as some other cool things you can do with the form fields. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is on the form field page for Angular Material, we're going to just grab their first example and see if we can get it working on our own basic site. So I'm going to copy that code and put it inside of this app component HTML. And you'll notice it has mat form field in it as well as input. So we'll need to start importing those modules so this can work. So in our app module, I'm first going to import the mat form field module and the mat input module. Also make sure you have the browser animations module imported from Angular Platform Browser Animations. Next thing we gotta do is we gotta import the forms module as well as the reactive forms module, and those will both come from Angular Forms. Alright, so once we have all that set up, I believe our first example should work. So mat option is not a known element, which means I forgot that they were using this mat select, so we'll want to import that. So going back to the module, I'm going to import mat select module. So if we refresh our site, we'll see that we get the input and the text area and the select. Yeah, so that looks fine. We don't have the CSS that they have on their site, that's why they're all in a row, but that doesn't really matter. So the next thing that we can do is we can configure the floating label if we want. The floating label is this text up here, this input. It's by default it's set to auto, which means when you type something it'll go up there so you can still see what it is. But if we adjust the float label property of mat form field, we can change what it does, so we can set it to always or never if we want it to do something different. So let's try changing it on the first one to never. And then we'll see what that looks like. So when we type, it just goes away like a normal input usually does. And then if we change it to always, then that'll just make it so it's always at the top. So another thing that's described in here is the required attribute. And if we place that as an attribute inside of the input element, or any of these input elements, it'll put a star next to the input, and it'll require, like it'll throw an error if the user doesn't fill this out after they've clicked on it and gone off of it. But we don't have our errors displayed anywhere right now, so for now we won't see that error. Also, if we don't want the required attribute to show as a star, but we still want it to be required, then we can just go in our code and place the hide required marker attribute on the mat form field, so on the parent. So if we see what that looks like, we'll see the star go away, but it will still be required, so it would still throw an error. But again, we can't see the error right now. Alright, so moving on, the next section is on hints. And basically, this will just allow us to place a hint below our input. And there are some cool things you can do, like change the alignment, whether or not it's at the end. And I'm going to make our hint just say something like my hint. And going back to our site, we'll see it says my hint at the end. If we want it to be at the beginning, then all we have to do is change it to start. So I'll change it to start. Now it's at the start. Alright, so the next section is on errors. basically they have this mat error below their input, and it will always be below the input. The mat error and the mat hint occupy the same space, so if there's an error, you won't see the hint. And the way that it works is they're checking to see if there's an error on the email form control, and that email form control is defined in the TypeScript. So I'm going to first bind the form control to that variable which is defined in the TypeScript, and then now I'm actually going to implement that in the TypeScript. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into my own TypeScript file. Alright, and then we also need to import form control and validators, and they're both from Angular Forms. Alright, so this email variable is being declared as a new form control. Okay, and then this empty string right here, this is just the form state. So by default we want the form state to be untouched, empty, nothing's happened to it. And then the second parameter, as shown here in the tooltip, is the validator, or in this case we're going to define multiple validators. Our email is both required and it's an email. So there are a bunch of validators defined inside this validators class. We're not going to do anything fancy here, we're just going to use the defaults. In my upcoming episode on Angular input fields, we'll do a more advanced validator, but for now we're not going to. So we also have this function called getErrorMessage, and that's just going to check the form and see what kind of error it has. So if we have the error required, which means that the user skipped over this, but it is required, so we're going to say you have to have a value. And otherwise, if it has the email error, that means that they didn't input valid email, so we're going to say not a valid email. And then finally, if neither of those are true, we know that there was no error, so we're going to return the empty string. Okay, and the way that's being used inside of our HTML is inside of our mat error we call getErrorMessage, and that is shown only when email.invalid. So that means any error at all is active inside of the email form control, and then it will call that getErrorMessage and it will tell the user exactly what they need to do. So let's try that out. Okay, so here in the input I'm going to skip over it, and it says you must enter a value. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to type in AOU. I'm going to go back and it says not a valid email. Then I'm going to go back and then I'm going to type jamie.bot@gmail.com. And then the hint returns because the error is gone, and voila. Alright, let's get on to the next thing. So you can also have a prefix and suffix, like this $sign or this eyeball. And the way you do that, super simple. You just mark an element as mat prefix, and it can be a span or an icon or anything that would fit nicely in that space. So I'm going to copy these two down here. They seem pretty nice. I'm going to copy those and see if we can get them working on our site. The order of these doesn't matter at all, it's just that you tag it with mat prefix as the attribute. Okay, and our form doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's asking for an email and it's putting a dollar amount on it, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's prefixes and suffixes. Alright, so the next thing we can do is theming. And if you haven't seen my video on custom theming, be sure to check that out. We're just going to be using one of the default themes. So in my style.css, I've imported one of the pre-built themes, Indigo Pink. So to make the theme work with the form field, all you have to do is set the color equal to any of primary, accent, or warning. I'm going to do primary. And that will cause the entire form field to use the primary color. I think it's blue in this case. I think it's primary by default. Yeah, I want to say it's primary by default, so I'm going to change it to accent and see if that changes it. So it was primary by default because before it was always blue, and so now it's pink. And these are all separate form fields, so changing one won't affect all of them. So like this one has accent, and then these other two are blue because primary is the default. Alright, so that concludes the tutorial on map form fields. Let me know if you guys like this video, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this.